Alright, how's it going again, class? This is Mr. Miles, and coming at you to finish off Lesson 2, and then we'll move on to Lesson 3. Now, you remember the last time we left off, we were talking about the different, either you were a gymnosperm for the seed plants, or you could have been an angiosperm. Now, with gymnosperms, you remember these are the naked seeds, so these are like the ginkgos, the pine trees, your Christmas trees, anything you're dealing with. But now we're going to talk a little bit about the angiosperms. And the types of angiosperms we're gonna see is you're going to split off into two called the monocots and the dicots. And the reason these split off is because these are both talking about how many of these they have. And these are the parts of the seed. So if you're dealing with a monocot, remember mono means one, dicot, di means two, and cot is just simply talking about the cotyledons. So if you're a dicot, means two cotyledons, you have two parts to it. And that was what we were dealing with today when we had the lima bean. So remember, we could split that in half, and on the one side you could see the little embryo, which would eventually become the plant. And you could see the endosperm all in here, and then the endosperm all in here. Now, with a monocot, because it's only one, we wouldn't be able to split that evenly down the middle like we did with these. It doesn't have like that center line. It would just actually break, and you have to smash it open. So that's how you can tell the difference between a monocot and a dicot. Now, again, when we're talking about the pollination in the seed, so remember, especially with our flowers, we're talking about we have those little pollen grains, and our good friends the bees normally take them around for us. So there's our cute little bee. There's a stinger. So they fly around, they pick up those little pollen grains. Those pollen grains will go into a flower, and in there, the pollen grain, if it has the male part, and it goes into the female part, and then you get your lovely seed. So again, pollen grains, they get transported. Sometimes they get transported by wind, so the wind could blow the pollen grain into there. Once they go into there, again, it'll form with the female part, so you have the sperm in the pollen grain, and you have the egg inside the ovary of the flower, and then out comes a seed. Now that finished Lesson 2, so you are now officially done with Lesson 2. Hooray, hooray, hooray. But now we move on to Lesson 3. In Lesson 3, we're talking about different plant structures. The first plant structure we're introduced to in Lesson 3 is the root. And we know what roots do. Roots are there for absorption. And they also serve as anchors, so they hold it in place. Now, you can get two different types of roots. You can either get, a taproot. And remember, a taproot's the one that looks like it just burrows deep into the ground. It has the fibers coming off that main branch. It's your taproot. Or you can get, this is always such a fun word to say, you can get the fibrous root. And remember, those ones come down, and it kind of is just like a big tangled mess, and it spreads out, just like that. So those are two types. And on the root, near the tip, you're going to have something called, so that's the tip of a root, you have something called a root cap. And what this root cap does is it's there simply for protection. So you have all of these different cells that are dividing, undergoing mitosis, and they need to be protected, so they're protected by the root cap. Now, the next part that you deal with is you deal with a stem. When we're dealing with a stem, we deal with we can deal with two types of stem. You can either have the woody stem, and yes, you guessed it, it's made of wood. Or you can get the herbaceous. Whoops. Or sorry, I don't know where my brain is right now. Herbaceous. So you can get the herbaceous. And pretty much, as you guessed it, it's not wood, so it's anything that's not. So a dandelion would have a stem, but it would be herbaceous, not woody. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward concept. You guys shouldn't have any trouble with it at all. Now, the next thing, and we're going to keep this kind of simple, just two things, is just keep in mind, sometimes you can get something on the outside called bark, and we're familiar with the trees, and that's with the woody trees. Now, again, herbaceous, they're not going to have that bark, because the dandelion does not have bark. It would look kind of awkward. Now, inside there, they have another thing called cambium. And if you look at your book on page 102, you can read about cambium. Now, next is a layer of cells called the cambium, which divides to produce new phloem and xylem. So the cambium is very important. Remember, I asked that question. I said, well, do non-vascular plants have cambium? And if you're smart, you'd say no, because they have no xylem and phloem. Good. Now, the other part, and we got to do this a little bit today in our lab, is we got to take those trees and look at all their tree rings. And these are terrible drawings of tree rings, but remember, if you count each tree ring, these are annual, so they come once a year. So you can tell how old they were. And we had trees ranging from, being first brought up in 1993 all the way back to 1985. Those kind of trees. So that's kind of cool. Some of them are older than me, all of them. I'm pretty sure, yeah, they're all older than you, too. Now, the last thing we talked about today, and if you can tell I'm moving through this quite fast, but the nice thing about these is you can rewatch them or slow them down, anything like that, is the leaf, the leaves. And remember we said that leaves are the ones that are responsible for photosynthesis. When they do that, they have a problem. They can have water loss, which is known as transpiration. And that means water loss. The reason they have this water loss is because to do photosynthesis, they need to be out in the sun, but the sun evaporates water. And so they have that problem. Well, they solve it by coming up with that waxy layer called the cuticle. But because it's not letting water through, it's not letting anything else through. It's not letting gas through. It's not letting gas in or out. So it has to come up with another solution, something that can open and close. That's called the stoma. And I think for some reason... Oh, there we go, yeah. The stoma. Or the stomata if you're talking about all of them. So when we're talking about the stoma, what this is this thing can open and it can also close in order to let gases in order to let gases out, and to try and keep as much water in as it possibly can. And so that's pretty much everything that we talked about up to this point. Tomorrow we're going to talk about seed dispersal, so be super excited for that. But yeah, that pretty much covers it. Again, feel free to ask me any questions, especially if you're having trouble downloading the, oh my gosh, I'm having a brain fart here. If you're having trouble downloading these podcasts to your smartphone or iPod or anything like that, I can try and help you with that. So yeah, feel free to email me, and if not, I will talk to you tomorrow. All right, bye.